Hi everyone, my name is Srivatsa. I am a site reliability engineer at One2N and we have Jaideep today. And welcome back to One2N Bits. So Jaideep is a regular here and I'll be your new host here. And let's get started out. The topic here today we're going to be discussing is disaster recovery, right? We've all heard of it. Some of them have been there in the disaster, and now we're going to be discussing what it takes to be ready for the disaster, right? So let's start with a very neat hook, which is the AWS outage that recently occurred in October, right? So Jaideep, what resiliency gaps do you think the recent outage exposed, both to engineering teams and business?
The AWS outage one is pretty hot because it was Diwali time.
Yep. 15 hours of chaos.
15 hours of chaos. And while AWS being AWS, world class engineering team, they hardly fails. But when they are the business that are actually running on top of AWS,
Right.
were they ready to switch to another region, or were they waiting for AWS to actually recover?
Just recover.
Right. Well, AWS was meeting their SLAs, but were the businesses able to meet their SLAs to their customers who were running on top of AWS? So,
Cool. So let's take a step back from this and actually introduce the topic here, just disaster recovery. So Jaideep, tell me, why do I even require disaster recovery? What does it mean for me as a business? What are the stakes riding on this?
well, bottom line is business continuity, right? Business continuity is one of the important aspects, like how much of a dollar value that you lose in case one of your cloud or your data center infrastructure actually goes down, and you have an ability to recover and cater to your customer or to your business, right? Now, there are caveats here when you say business continuity, because you need to also trade off the economics of it at times. If you are in a compliance domain, you don't have any option. You'll have to bite the bullet and actually take this hit and absorb that cost and set up some DR sites, right? So yeah, this becomes a very critical factor, because not everyone will need it, because it depends on the nature of your business. But what I have seen, if you are in a very regulated industry where there is a governance and compliance, business continuity is important, like fintechs.
Well, that's a valid point you make there. So what I want to ask you now is, a lot of these engineering teams and businesses think that, hey, we're migrating to the cloud, we're on the cloud, and I already ride on the resiliency of the cloud provider. Do I really need DR? And why do you think this assumption is very risky?
Right. Well, one thing is, a lot of your hyperscalers and these public clouds actually give you the ability to have a resiliency, because there's a lot of engineering effort, right? And it's been there for almost close to now 2 decades. But what people and businesses need to understand is that while your infrastructure is resilient, not necessarily your business or your technology stack is, right? So if it is not, then probably you have to be prepared for it, right? Your infrastructure may go down, like one of the outages that happened, but were you able to actually go to the another site and cater your business from there? That is a question that every technology leader needs to ask.
Pretty much. And I think this brings us, when we focus on the keyword of recovery, I think there are two beautiful terms that the industry loves using. The RTO and an RPO, right? Recovery time objective and recovery point objective. Pretty technical terms, loaded also at times. So would you want to take us through what those two mean?
Yeah, basically it means the maximum acceptable downtime that one can have, right? Which has to be measured, and every business will want to reduce it, and they will try to reduce it. The other one is RPO, which is recovery point objective. This is more of a critical metric. Why? Because we are talking about data. How much of a data loss as a business are you able to absorb or afford to know? How much of data that you can lose? Now, this usually is non-negotiable. Every business, like data loss, is something that cannot be tolerated, right, at any given point in time. Availability of your systems depends. Okay, not okay, but your RPO needs to be really, really low. In fact, negligible.
Got it.
Yep.
So, and I think a lot of these technologies today are starting to use these terms and bank on these terms to, invest into businesses. For example, recovery time objective. From now, how I understand this, I need to be back up in duration X, right? Now, depending on the criticality of your business, that X could be seconds, minutes, or hours. And it's the same with RPO. A lot of the businesses are starting to bank on this, and becomes all the more important for us to clarify here. And now let me bring you a segment on my next question. Businesses a lot of times, treat backups as their disaster recovery, strategy. A lot of businesses, in fact, executives, when we ask them, they're often told that, hey, our backup infrastructure exists. We have a DR plan in place. So I wanted to ask you, what does disaster recovery mean beyond just backups?
Right. I mean, a disaster recovery can be backups for you as well. Right. So this important point is, what is the business and the domain that you are catering? Right. So if you say that, hey, I am okay to have a point in time snapshot, and I am okay to lose some data between the intervals from your previous backup to your next backup, fine, fair, works for you, right? Because you have categorized your data, that what you really want to have it in real time and what you want to take it in intervals. As I said, that there is an economic cost of setting up a DR from your data stateless to stateful systems, right? So it now varies on the kind of categories that we have. One is just pure backup only, where you're saying that, hey, I'll just take up my snapshots in intervals. The other type that says that it's a cold site, where you are just replicating the data in near real time.
Got it.
Right? But you may not have the availability in that scenario. In such a case, what is the next iteration that actually comes, which is mostly like a warm standby, where your infrastructure is ready, you have your data backups available, but probably you need to provision your stateless services there, right? Beyond that, again, as and when we are actually progressing in the type of the recoveries that you want to set up, there is an economic cost as well that's coming up here. Right? Then you have your hot standbys or your active standbys. Now, these active standbys is like your stateless and stateful services are ready. You just require a manual intervention to, trigger a failover.
Got it.
Right? And the ultimate, the best one that any engineering leader would like, right? That there is an automatic failover. It's an active side.
Very smooth.
Very smooth, but that's, you're talking about internet scale companies who will be able to do this.
And I believe the spectrum that you've just explained here, and I think it's very obvious through the conversation, is that the cost for me to take you from a cold standby to something like an active standby state actually requires investment in both engineering and business.
Yep. Yeah, and it also depends on the kind of infrastructure that you are operating on. Let's say if you're on cloud, right? Usually your cloud DR strategies, because a lot of your AWSs now provide a multi-region support.
Yes.
Do you opt in for these kind of services? Do you end up using them? Of course, cost will increase for you, but are you even judiciously setting them up? Right? Where they are, when a disaster actually happens, the failover triggers, and you see that, hey, the service is actually coming up, and you are able to cater to your business. People end up choosing a lot of lambdas and serverless functions because they have this ability to scale at a certain certain threshold,
right,
where you don't have to intervene a lot, right? And of course, there are like a lot of these cloud native services, databases, which are actually provides a built-in replication, right? So this is more of a from a cloud strategy, but the trick comes in, you are in data centers and you have to do up
a hybrid cloud setup.
A hybrid cloud setup with replication for your stateful systems.
That is correct.
That is a very tricky scenario,
tricky spot
for every engineering reliability teams, because now you need to have to consider the geographic constraints, because you may not be able to leverage a backbone network, right? So the latency becomes very critical in such scenarios, right? Then what kind of a storage solution that you end up choosing? The replication, do you do it at a more of a logical replication, or are you doing just like, when I say logical replication, it means, are you setting up let's say a MySQL slave there, right? And which is trying to replicate your data in your data center, right? Or you are just like doing it more at an disk or a volume level. Right. A lot of cloud native solutions have actually now come up, which gives you this ability. But on what kind of a tooling stack that you end up choosing, that also matters.
Right? That, I think, Now let us imagine, right, if I were a business running a bunch of services, I work across multiple countries, servicing my product here. What kind of a recovery option or a strategy should I have in place? Or if I were to ask you to help me out with setting up my DR strategy, what are certain key areas you would look for?
That's an interesting question, Srivatsa. I think what I've observed, if your engineering practices uh, are good, when I say good, you maintain in hygiene, you have automation in place, you have infrastructure as code, and where you are able to spin off a lot of things without manual intervention,
Right.
and importantly, in your team there are no single point of failure, right? If you have read this book called Phoenix Project,
Yeah,
right?
the hero culture.
The hero culture
Yeah.
is not there because people will have vacations, people will be sick, people will have holidays. You need to understand that hey, the team should have a shared knowledge,
Right.
in during specific time. Now if you think about it, it was a Diwali time, though it is celebrated in the Asian part or in the India subcontinent region, but a lot of the engineers actually cater to US based
The
companies,
worldwide, yeah.
right? So you now imagine that how it would have been if the culture was that hey, the knowledge has to be shared. Anybody and most of the engineers are able to go ahead and trigger a failover or set things by themselves. Then that's a good culture.
I think that's a very interesting point you make there, and I'd like to bring up an analogy here.
Right.
How a lot of these offices have mandatory fire drills where
Yes.
they randomly hand over that fire extinguisher to an employee
Yes.
and say go.
Yeah.
Right. I think that's a very healthy mindset to have
Yes.
because it shows people what kind of trouble you could get into first,
Yes.
and most importantly, it shows businesses how your employees would act in certain distress like that.
Yes.
And I think that relates back a lot to DR, where your critical teams should have the confidence. When the business says it's the equivalent of handing over that fire extinguisher and
Yes.
says that hey, we need to recover now.
Right.
And I think you mentioned rightly that engineering team efforts play a very big role in this, and having a confidence in your engineering team mostly matters to that. And that brings me to my next question, right? On paper, DR seems very straightforward. You mentioned there are cold standbys, there are active. But what does it really mean for my engineering team? Can I just ask my engineering team tomorrow, hey, we're on cold storage today, can we move to active tomorrow?
Yeah. Now, by the way, there's very one important point. A lot of times, engineering teams do end up setting up a DR, but you not necessarily know how many times they practice a failover.
Yes.
Right. And have a cadence as a practice. Most of the time, what I see that it doesn't become a priority because everything is good.
Yeah.
Right. And when everything is good, why do you even want to disrupt things?
Makes sense.
Right. So the whole idea of I won't say like you disrupt at a large blast radius, but at least do some kind of a chaos engineering to even understand, hey, is your DR really working? Right? What is the use of a parachute which is not tested and you only just tested in the air?
Very interesting. And I think, testing a parachute is a question of should you test it or can I test it?
Yes.
But I think the answer is you need to have answer to both of these questions.
Yes.
As a big business that's running.
And here, the leadership, technology leadership actually needs to prioritize this.
Fair.
Right? And this needs to be communicated to the business leaders as well. That look, guys, this is important. I know it is like insurance.
Yes.
Right? You are just preparing yourself that hey, we do not end up losing a lot of money for some or the other reason, or maybe because we are not able to cater because our compliance says so. In fact, a lot of times the economics are still okay, but if the compliance forces you, there is a possibility that you can go in an amber or a red.
Yes.
Right. So these things has to be thought from top down.
Also,
well.
I think addressing the stigma here, a lot of businesses actually fear being prepared for disaster recovery.
Yes, yes.
What I mean is that when you ask them in a regulatory tone, or when you ask them from a business to business perspective as a partner that I might be engaging with them, the answer is always yes. Yes, we are DR compliant. Yes, we have XYZ numbers for failovers, right? However, I think deep down we know that the day when we ask somebody to conduct a chaos engineering experiment on a production system that's making you millions in revenue, right? I think the fear that day truly kicks in. And I think this is specifically what the good engineering practices and the hygiene you just mentioned should focus on solving for, right? As an executive or as a director, I should never have a single doubt that I should be able to fail over in any point of time, right? I should not be able to, the thought that my product makes money, should I stop this for a DR exercise, shouldn't be coming in. And I think this is where it's very important that we say, what kind of patterns we observe here. So that is the next question, of course, which is, what patterns do you see across our clients here? I'm sure you would have seen a lot of DR sites, a lot of DR sites that work and don't work. And probably you've seen DR sites that work so flawlessly that we're actually proud of it. So give me a segment to this.
Usually what happens is, now thankfully with cloud coming in, a lot of these cloud providers have their own regions and data centers in the geographies. But there will be times that you will have to end up choosing up a multi-cloud setup, right? Because you don't have any other alternative option. And the law of the land says that, hey, you should be in this jurisdiction. The data has to reside in this particular geography, right? So there you end up having up a multi-cloud setup, or same cloud in different regions, or you have a hybrid setup of a cloud as well as a data center.
That's correct.
Right? But that what requires is some kind of an engineering mindset that, hey, this cloud service is an abstraction to me. I don't know how underneath it will work. Your reliability engineers need to think distributed systems, networks, and identify, hey, it is doing some kind of a replication. Though one can think it is just pure operations. But even to understand and pulling the right knob and the lever, you need to have the understanding how these systems, distributed systems, are operating underneath.
Because end of the day, I think it just comes down to that, when the fire strikes, all I'm expecting is somebody to extinguish that fire. I can't expect somebody planning on how to extinguish the fire.
Absolutely.
Readiness matters. And I think here's a very trick question and also a fun question that I want to ask you, right?
I don't know what I'm expecting.
So imagine I were the executive of a company, Jaideep, and I always trust my engineering teams. However, I think I want to really ask a few set of questions to that engineering team that instills confidence back in me, knowing that we are actually DR ready. Because of course, without knowing this, I can't authorize a test failover. So what would be some of your top questions that, if asked to an engineering team, would get your answers? You know that your team is ready for a DR or not.
This is a bit controversial, but a bit funny. But when was the last time you did a DR setup? Or when was the last time you tested your DR setup, basically?
Tomorrow.
Tomorrow, right? That's one. And then the second important aspect is the time it actually takes for your service to fail over. Is it actually matching, and it matches what is being put it in a report, and it actually put it what your engineers are seeing it day in, day out during their DR setups? And is the disaster recovery actually working? If the delta is really high, you need to think about it, your DR strategy. And the third is very important. Your engineering culture, do you have a hero culture, or do you have a single point of failure, or your team is very well versed because there is a rotation of knowledge? So in my opinion, these three questions I would definitely ask my engineering teams that, hey, what is the status on these?
I think these are really some questions that need to be asked time and again. I would suggest probably every quarter. And I think one perhaps action item I would ask and recommend folks to do is for the leadership to be present during DR exercises. So we actually know how the team reacts and behaves, which is very important. For example, the hero culture you just mentioned, right? If you as a business are banking on perhaps a particular team or a member, you know that they're good at that and they're going to get you through and give you a number. But I want that to be an entire business function, right? So my presence in that call or in that activity would actually give me a lot more visibility into how my team behaves collectively, because we're firefighting here. And I think exiting from this safely is the biggest priority here. So I think this has been a super fun chat, and we've learned a lot, right? We've learned what kind of DR exists, what kind of decisions to take when you're setting up DR, and also why DR is expensive as you move towards the ambitious active setup. And also we did a few controversial questions, and I think that will actually help you, reconsider some of your DR decisions or reaffirm them, right? So thank you for joining us on this episode of One2N Bits. We'll see you on the next one. Thank you.